Commander Li Jun walked into the enormous throne room, his boots echoing against the polished crystal floor. The walls stretched up so high he couldn't see the ceiling, covered in shimmering purple stones that pulsed with strange light. Hundreds of alien nobles lined both sides of the chamber. Their forearms crossed in what he'd learned was a gesture of superiority among the Zephyrians. At the far end sat Emperor Veltak on his massive throne, carved from a single piece of glowing crystal. The alien ruler was twice the size of any human, with deep blue skin that seemed to shift colors in the strange light. His four eyes, arranged in pairs above and below, fixed on Jun with an expression that made the commander's skin crawl. Those eyes held the kind of cruel amusement a cat might have while playing with a mouse. Jun had been preparing for this moment for weeks. The war between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire had lasted 3 brutal years. Earth's forces had fought bravely, but they were simply outmatched. The aliens could move objects with their minds, read thoughts from across a room and coordinate their attacks through mental links that human technology couldn't even detect. When the Zephyrians offered a ceasefire instead of complete annihilation, Jun knew humanity had no choice but to accept whatever terms came with it. The little human commander arrives," Emperor Veltak's voice boomed through the chamber without his mouth moving. The words appeared directly in Jun's mind, a sensation that still made him uncomfortable, even after months of these telepathic conversations. "You look nervous, Commander Li Jun. Do you fear what generous gift I have prepared for your primitive species?" The alien nobles around the room began making a sound like wind chimes in a storm, which Jun had learned was their version of laughter. The Emperor raised one of his 4 hands and the sound stopped instantly. "Your people fought with surprising determination," Veltak continued, his mental voice dripping with false praise. "Such interesting creatures, relying on crude metal, weapons and chemical explosives. It reminds me of how children play with sticks and stones. For this amusing entertainment, I have decided to bestow upon you a most precious gift." Jun kept his face neutral, though his heart was racing. In his experience, when powerful enemies offered gifts, they usually came with hidden costs that weren't revealed until it was too late to refuse. Emperor Veltak gestured with 2 of his arms, and a side door opened. "I present to you my daughter, Princess Narazel. Consider her my contribution to improving your species." The woman who entered the throne room was unlike any alien Jun had seen before, while other Zephyrians moved with flowing, almost dance-like motions that spoke of their psychic abilities constantly adjusting their balance and posture. She walked normally. Her skin was the same deep blue as her father's, but where his shifted and shimmered with psychic energy, hers remained a steady, beautiful shade. Her silver eyes met Jun's briefly before looking down at the floor. "You see, Commander," the Emperor's mental voice took on a tone of mock sadness. "My daughter is what your kind might call defective merchandise. She was born without the gifts that make our people superior to all others in the galaxy. She cannot move objects with her mind, cannot read thoughts, cannot even sense the emotions of those around her. Among my people, she is worth less than the crystal dust we sweep from our floors." The court erupted in that wind chime laughter again, louder and more cruel than before. Some of the nobles pointed at the princess with multiple arms, their mental voices creating a cacophony of mockery that Jun could feel pressing against his thoughts, even though he couldn't understand their language. Princess Narazel stood perfectly still through it all. Jun watched her carefully and saw something that surprised him. While her father and his court saw shame and defectiveness, Jun saw something else entirely. The princess's silver eyes weren't looking down in defeat. They were observing, watching, analyzing every person in the room with the kind of careful attention that came from someone who had learned to survive by paying attention to details others missed. "She will make an interesting pet for your people," Emperor Veltak continued. "Perhaps you can find some use for her that we could not. After all, your species seems quite skilled at making do with inferior tools and broken equipment." Jun stepped forward and bowed deeply, a gesture he knew the Zephyrians interpreted as acceptance and submission. "Your Majesty's generosity is overwhelming. I accept this gift on behalf of humanity and promise that Princess Narazel will be treated with the respect due to one of your royal blood." As he straightened, June caught the princess looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, but for just a moment he thought he saw the faintest hint of a smile cross her lips. In that instant, June realized that Emperor Veltak might have just made the biggest mistake of his very long alien life. The first week aboard the human starship was harder than Princess Narazel had expected. She sat alone in the small quarters Commander June had assigned to her, watching through the porthole as stars streaked past in brilliant lines of light. The ship felt cramped compared to the vast crystal palaces of her homeworld, but it also felt strangely welcoming in a way the royal court never had. Every morning she would walk through the corridors and feel the curious stares of the human crew. They weren't cruel like the looks she received back home, but they were still uncomfortable. These humans had been fighting her people for years, losing friends and family to Zephyrian psychic attacks. Now they were supposed to accept an enemy, Princess as one of their own. Jun found her in the observation deck on the 5th day, staring out at the nebula they were passing through. The swirling clouds of gas and dust created patterns of purple and gold that reminded her of the tapestries in her father's throne room. "You've been avoiding the crew," Jun said, settling into the chair beside her. His voice was gentle, without judgment. Narazel kept looking at the stars. "They don't trust me, I don't blame them. In their position, I wouldn't trust me either." "It's not about trust," Jun replied. "They're curious about you. Most of them have never seen a Zephyrian up close who wasn't trying to kill them. They're wondering what makes you different." She finally turned to look at him. "What makes me different is what makes me worthless. I'm broken, Commander. Your people fight wars with weapons and ships and strategy. My people fight with their minds. They can crush metal with a thought, read enemy plans from 100 miles away, coordinate attacks without ever speaking a word. And She held up her hands, staring at them. "I can't even move a grain of sand without touching it." Jun studied her face carefully. "Tell me about growing up in the palace." The question surprised her, but something in his tone made her want to answer. "I learned early to stay quiet and watch. When you can't read minds, you have to read faces, body language, the way people's voices change when they lie. When you can't sense danger psychically, you have to notice the small details that warn you trouble is coming. I became very good at seeing things others missed, simply because I had to." Their conversation was interrupted when Tactical Officer Kim Darbin rushed onto the observation deck, her face pale with worry. "Commander, we have a problem. We're approaching the Kepler system, but the navigation computers are going crazy. The Zephyrian star charts we captured are shifting and changing on the screens. Our human systems can't make sense of them." Jun frowned. "What kind of shifting?" "It's like the information is alive," Darbin explained. "The star positions keep moving. The safe routes disappear and reappear in different places. Our navigators are getting headaches just looking at the displays. Whatever psychic encoding the Zephyrians use in their charts, it's designed to confuse non-telepathic minds." Narazel stood up suddenly. "May I see the navigation room?" Darbin looked uncertain, but June nodded. They made their way to the bridge, where 3 human navigators sat rubbing their temples in frustration. The main display showed what should have been a clear star chart, but the information seemed to pulse and flow like water. "This is a psychic storm system," Narazel said immediately, studying the chaotic display. "My people use these charts in areas where psychic energy interferes with normal space. The information is encoded to be read by telepathic minds that can filter out the interference." "But you can't read it either," Darbin pointed out. Narazel smiled for the first time since boarding the ship. "I can't read the psychic encoding, but I also can't be confused by it. Watch." She moved to the display and began pointing out patterns that the humans couldn't see. "The interference creates a rhythm. See how these stars seem to jump every 7 seconds, and these navigation markers pulse in groups of 3. The real information is hidden in the timing." She spent the next hour working with Darbin and the navigation team, teaching them to ignore the psychic static and focus on the underlying mathematical patterns. What had seemed like chaotic nonsense slowly revealed itself to be an incredibly sophisticated navigation system. "How did you figure this out so quickly?" Darbin asked in amazement. "Because I've spent my whole life learning to see what others can't," Narazel replied. When everyone around you has superhuman abilities, you develop different kinds of perception just to survive. Jun watched from the captain's chair as his crew worked with the Zephyrian princess, their initial suspicion replaced by growing respect. He was beginning to understand that Emperor Veltuk had made a serious miscalculation. What the alien ruler saw as a worthless defect might actually be exactly what humanity needed to level the playing field in this war. As they successfully navigated through the psychic storm system, Jun realized that Princess Narazel wasn't broken at all. She was just built for a different kind of warfare than her people understood. Engineer Park Sora had always been fascinated by things that didn't work the way they were supposed to. Her workshop was filled with broken equipment that she'd somehow turned into useful tools, much to the amazement of her fellow crew members. So when Princess Narazel started spending time in the engineering section, Sora saw her as just another interesting puzzle to solve. "You know what's strange?" Sora said one afternoon as they worked together repairing a damaged sensor array. "When I'm working on Zephyrian technology, I can feel this weird pressure in my head, like something pushing against my thoughts. But when you touch the same equipment, nothing happens." Narazel paused, holding a crystal component up to the light. "That's because Zephyrian technology is partially psychic. It responds to mental energy as much as electrical power. Since I don't have any psychic abilities, it treats me like I'm not there." Sora's eyes lit up with excitement. "Wait, you mean you're completely invisible to psychic detection?" "I suppose so," Narazel replied. "I never thought of it as an advantage before. Back home, it just meant I couldn't use most of our technology properly." Sora immediately called Commander Jun to the engineering bay. When he arrived, she was practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "Commander, we need to test something. Princess Narazel might be the secret weapon we've been looking for." They spent the next several days running experiments with captured Zephyrian equipment. Every test confirmed Sora's theory. Psychic sensors couldn't detect Narazel at all. Security systems designed to read minds and intentions completely ignored her presence. Communication devices that should have picked up her thoughts registered nothing but empty space. "It's like you're a ghost to their technology," Jun said in amazement. "You could walk right past their guards and they'd never know you were there." The opportunity to test this theory came sooner than expected. Long-range sensors detected a Zephyrian raiding fleet approaching the human mining colony on Kepler 442b. The colony was defenseless, populated mostly by civilian families and workers who had no military training. Jun gathered his senior officers in the briefing room. "We can't match their firepower in a direct fight," he said, studying the tactical display. "They have 3 warships to our 1, and their psychic coordination gives them a huge advantage in battle." "What if we don't fight them directly?" Narazel suggested quietly. Everyone turned to look at her, and she continued more confidently. "Their command ship will stay back from the fighting, coordinating the attack through psychic links. If someone could get aboard that ship and disrupt their communications," Soros grinned, "someone they can't detect with their sensors." The plan they developed was risky but brilliant. Jun's ship would engage the Zephyrian raiders in open combat, drawing their attention while Narazel used a small shuttle to approach the command vessel undetected. Sora had modified the shuttle systems to mask its energy signature, and Narazel's psychic invisibility would handle the rest. As the battle began above Kepler 442b, Jun watched the tactical display with growing concern. The Zephyrian ships moved with perfect coordination, their psychic links allowing them to anticipate and counter every human tactic. His crew was fighting bravely, but they were clearly outmatched. Meanwhile, Narazel's shuttle drifted silently toward the enemy command ship. The massive vessel's sensors swept past her repeatedly without detecting anything unusual. She docked with the ship's maintenance bay, an area that would normally be heavily monitored, but appeared completely empty to Zephyrian perception. Inside the enemy ship, Narazel moved like a shadow through corridors filled with alien crew members. They walked past her without a second glance, their psychic senses registering nothing but empty space where she stood. She made her way to the command center, where she could observe the enemy officers coordinating the attack. Using a small recording device Sora had given her, Narazel documented the Zephyrian battle tactics, communication frequencies, and command protocols. More importantly, she located the ship's central communication array, the psychic amplifier that allowed the command vessel to coordinate the entire fleet. Following Sora's instructions, Narazel carefully placed several small devices around the communication array. These weren't explosives but rather signal jammers designed to interfere with psychic transmissions. When she activated them, the effect was immediate and devastating. Suddenly, the three Zephyrian attack ships lost their coordination. Without the psychic link to their command vessel, they began making mistakes, firing on each other by accident, and failing to respond to changing battle conditions. June's forces, trained to fight as individuals rather than a psychic collective, quickly gained the upper hand. The battle was over within minutes. 2 Zephyrian ships were destroyed, and the third surrendered when it realized its situation was hopeless. The command vessel, confused and unable to understand how their communications had been sabotaged, attempted to flee, but was quickly surrounded by human reinforcements that had arrived from nearby systems. As June's crew celebrated humanity's first major victory against the Zephyrian Empire, Narazel quietly returned to her quarters. She had proven that her supposed weakness was actually an incredible strength, but more importantly, she had found a purpose that made her feel valuable for the first time in her life. Commander June found her later that evening, still looking out at the stars through her porthole. "The crew is calling you a hero," he said. She smiled softly. "I'm just glad I could finally contribute something useful." "Princess," June said seriously, "I think you're going to help us win this war." Intelligence Officer Yoon Min-ho had spent years studying intercepted Zephyrian communications, trying to understand how their society worked. He was brilliant at finding patterns in data that others missed, which made him the perfect person to help Princess Narazel with her growing suspicions about others like herself. "I've been thinking about something," Narazel said as she sat across from Min-ho in his cramped office, filled with computer screens and data tablets. "If I was born without psychic abilities, there must be others. My father always spoke about me like I was unique, but genetic conditions like this usually affect more than one person." Min-ho leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "That makes sense. In our intercepts of Zephyrian communications, we sometimes pick up fragments that don't fit the normal psychic patterns, messages that seem to be sent through regular technology instead of telepathic channels." Over the next few weeks, they worked together, analyzing years of collected intelligence data. Min-ho's expertise in pattern recognition, combined with Narazel's understanding of Zephyrian culture, revealed something fascinating. Hidden within the Empire's vast communication networks were traces of individuals who couldn't use psychic channels, people who had to rely on conventional technology to send messages. "Look at this," Narazel said excitedly, pointing to a data stream on Min-ho's largest monitor. "This communication pattern originates from the mining world of Zerion 7. It's sent using old-fashioned radio waves instead of psychic transmission. And see the coding structure. It's designed to look like routine equipment maintenance reports, but the timing intervals spell out words in ancient Zephyrian script." Min-ho studied the pattern carefully. Someone's hiding messages in plain sight, but why use such an old language? "Because modern Zephyrians don't bother learning ancient script," Narazel explained. "They rely on psychic knowledge transfer to understand historical information. Only someone who had to learn things the hard way, by reading and studying manually, would know these old writing systems." They spent days decoding the hidden messages, and what they found amazed them. There was an entire underground network of Zephyrians like Narazel scattered across dozens of worlds throughout the Empire. These forgotten individuals had been abandoned by their families, cast out from society, or forced into menial jobs because they lacked psychic abilities. But instead of giving up, they had adapted. They became mechanics who understood technology better than psychically dependent engineers. They worked as observers and record keepers, developing incredible attention to detail. Some had even become smugglers and traders, moving goods through routes that psychic authorities couldn't monitor because they couldn't sense the non-psychic operators. "They've been surviving in the shadows for generations," Min-ho realized. an entire invisible underclass that the Empire pretends doesn't exist. Narazel felt a mixture of excitement and sadness. Excitement at discovering she wasn't alone, but sadness at realizing how many others had suffered the same rejection she had experienced. "We need to contact them," she said firmly. "If they're willing to help, we could create a spy network that the Empire could never detect." Minho helped her craft carefully coded messages using the same ancient script patterns they had discovered. The first responses came within days, cautious but curious. Word spread through the hidden network that Emperor Veltak's supposedly worthless daughter was alive, free, and fighting alongside humans. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of Zephyrians reached out, sharing their locations, their skills, and their willingness to strike back at an empire that had discarded them. There was Kexmore, a maintenance worker on a major military base who had access to critical systems. Yintal, a former palace servant who still cleaned government buildings and overheard important conversations. Zoref, a cargo handler who could sabotage supply shipments without anyone suspecting. Within months, Narazel had coordinates with Minho to create something unprecedented, a resistance network that operated completely outside the Empire's ability to detect or counter. Her agents moved through Zephyrian society like ghosts, gathering intelligence, planting listening devices, and carrying out carefully planned acts of sabotage. The first major operation targeted 3 crucial supply routes that fed the Empire's military expansion. Kexmore disabled the navigation computers on a supply station, causing dozens of cargo ships to become lost in hyperspace. Yintal planted devices that interfered with the psychic communication arrays at a major logistics hub. Zoref arranged for critical weapon components to be mixed with defective parts, causing entire batches of military equipment to malfunction. Emperor Veltak's rage echoed through the palace when reports reached him of the systematic failures plaguing his supply lines. His military advisors stood before his crystal throne, unable to explain how their enemies seemed to know exactly where and when to strike. "How is this possible?" Veltak's psychic voice thundered through the throne room. "Our psychic surveillance. Networks monitor every major communication channel. Our mind readers scan for treacherous thoughts among our people, yet someone is coordinating attacks against us with perfect precision, and we cannot detect even a trace of their planning." His chief intelligence officer, a powerful telepath named Mordak, struggled to provide answers. "Great Emperor, we have scanned the minds of thousands of suspects. We have monitored every psychic communication in the affected systems. Whoever is doing this operates completely outside our ability to perceive them." For the first time in his long reign, Emperor Veltak felt a chill of genuine fear. An enemy he couldn't sense, couldn't predict, and couldn't counter was systematically dismantling his empire's infrastructure. Somewhere out there, his worthless daughter had become something he had never imagined possible, a threat he couldn't see coming. Combat instructor Han Wu-jin had trained soldiers for over 15 years, but he had never worked with a student. Quite like Princess Narazel, most recruits came to him with either natural fighting instincts or bad habits picked up from street fights. Narazel came with something completely different, a mind that approached combat like solving a complex puzzle. "Your people fight using psychic powers," Wu-jin said as they stood in the ship's training room, surrounded by practice weapons and combat dummies. "They can predict their enemies' moves by reading thoughts, throw objects without touching them, and coordinate attacks through mental links. You can't do any of that, which means you need to learn to fight the way humans do." Narazel picked up a practice sword, testing its weight and balance. "How do humans fight without being able to read their opponent's mind?" "We watch their body," Wu-jin explained, demonstrating a basic stance. "Every movement tells a story. The way someone shifts their weight before attacking, how their eyes focus before they strike, the tension in their shoulders when they're about to defend. We learn to read these signals faster than conscious thought." What amazed Wu-jin was how quickly Narazel absorbed these lessons. Her lifetime of observing people to survive had already trained her to notice tiny details that others missed. Within weeks, she could predict an opponent's attacks by watching micro-expressions cross their face, subtle changes in breathing patterns, or the way they positioned their feet. Most Zephyrians rely so heavily on psychic abilities that they never develop basic combat skills, she explained during one training session. They can crush an enemy with their mind, so they never learn proper footwork or weapon handling. But if you could somehow block their psychic powers, they'd be helpless, Wu Jin finished, grinning. That's exactly right. Your people have a critical weakness they don't even realize. As Narazel's combat skills improved, reports came in about a high-security Zephyrian prison facility called Titan 7th. Intelligence officer Minho had discovered that the facility held both human prisoners of war and Zephyrian political dissidents, including several more individuals like Narazel who lacked psychic abilities. It's heavily guarded, Minho explained during a briefing, with Commander Jun and the senior staff. Psychic barriers, mind-reading checkpoints, telepathic surveillance covering every inch of the facility. It would be impossible for any normal rescue team to get close without being detected. Narazel studied the facility blueprints that Minho had somehow acquired. What if the rescue team wasn't normal? Over the following days, she worked with Wu Jin to plan something unprecedented, a joint operation between human special forces and her network of psychically invisible Zephyrians. The plan required perfect coordination between people who had never worked together before, using tactics that had never been attempted in galactic warfare. The assault team consisted of 12 humans trained by Wu Jin and 8 Zephyrian outcasts who had volunteered for the dangerous mission. Narazel would lead them personally, putting her combat training to the ultimate test. On the night of the operation, their transport ship approached Titan 7 in complete stealth mode. The prison's psychic detection systems swept past them repeatedly, sensing only the human crew members, but completely missing the Zephyrian infiltrators, who registered as empty space to their sensors. "Remember," Narazel whispered to her mixed team as they prepared to launch their assault pods, "we move like humans fight. No psychic abilities to rely on, just skill, teamwork, and careful planning. Trust your training and watch each other's backs." The assault began at exactly midnight station time. While the human members of the team engaged the prison guards in direct combat, drawing attention to the main entrance, Narazel led her Zephyrian outcasts through maintenance tunnels that the facility's psychic surveillance couldn't monitor. The prison guards, accustomed to relying on telepathic coordination, found themselves confused and overwhelmed when faced with an enemy they couldn't sense or predict. Narazel's team moved through the facility like ghosts, disabling security systems, freeing prisoners, and eliminating guards who never saw them coming. In the high-security wing, they found 12 human prisoners who had been scheduled for execution the next day. More importantly, they discovered 6 Zephyrian outcasts who had been imprisoned for the crime of genetic deficiency, the same condition that Narazel carried. "You're really her," whispered one of the rescued Zephyrians, a young female named Kirovan, who had been imprisoned since childhood. "The Emperor's daughter who chose to fight." "I'm not fighting for revenge," Narazel replied as she helped cut the prisoners' restraints. "I'm fighting for all of us who were told we were worthless." The entire operation took less than 2 hours. By dawn, all 18 prisoners had been evacuated, and the rescue team had vanished without leaving any trace that psychic investigators could follow. The prison's commander found himself trying to explain to his superiors how an entire maximum security facility had been compromised by enemies his sensors couldn't detect. Back aboard Jun's ship, Wu Jin watched with pride as Narazel debriefed. Her mixed team of human and Zephyrian fighters, she had evolved from a cast-off princess into a military leader who commanded respect from both species. "You know what this means?" Jun said to Wu Jin as they observed the celebration in the ship's common area, where humans and Zephyrian outcasts were sharing stories and planning future operations together. Wu Jin nodded, smiling. "It means we just created the galaxy's first truly integrated military unit, and more importantly, we proved that the Empire's greatest strength, their psychic abilities, might also be their greatest weakness." The rescued prisoners brought valuable intelligence about other facilities and potential allies throughout the Empire. More significantly, they brought hope. Word of the successful rescue spread through Narazel's hidden network, inspiring other outcasts to believe that they could fight back against the system that had rejected them. Dr. Choi Hee-jin had always been fascinated by the differences between human and alien biology. Her medical bay aboard Jun's ship was filled with research equipment and samples from dozens of different species they had encountered during the war. But none of her previous studies had prepared her for what she discovered when she began examining Princess Narazel and the other rescued Zephyrian outcasts. "This is incredible," Hee-jin said, staring at the genetic analysis results on her computer screen. Narazel sat on the examination table, waiting patiently while the doctor reviewed the data for the third time. "Princess, you're not genetically defective at all. You're something completely different." Narazel looked confused. "But I can't use psychic abilities like other Zephyrians. How is that not a defect?" Hee-jin turned the screen so Narazel could see the complex genetic maps displayed there. "Look at this section here," she said, pointing to a cluster of highlighted genes. "Normal Zephyrians have neural pathways that are specifically designed to generate and receive psychic energy. But you and the others we rescued have a completely different brain structure." She pulled up a comparison image showing brain scans from both normal Zephyrians and the outcasts. "Your brains have developed natural barriers that block psychic influence. It's not that you can't generate psychic energy, it's that you're completely immune to it. This isn't a disability, it's an evolutionary adaptation." The implications hit Narazel immediately. "You mean we can't be mind-controlled?" "Exactly," Hee-jin confirmed excitedly. "The Zephyrian Empire maintains control through a combination of psychic surveillance and mental influence. They can plant thoughts in people's minds, force them to obey commands, even rewrite memories. But none of that works on you. You're literally invisible to their primary method of social control." Word of this discovery spread quickly through their growing network of allies. Captain Kang Tae-ho, their best pilot, immediately understood the strategic value of what Hee-jin had found. He requested a meeting with Commander Jun and the senior staff to discuss a new kind of operation. "If these outcasts are immune to psychic control, we need to get more of them out of Empire territory," Tae-ho explained, studying star charts on the briefing room's main display. "I've been analyzing flight patterns and security zones. There are dozens of worlds where these individuals are probably living in hiding, afraid to reveal themselves." Jun nodded thoughtfully. "What are you proposing?" "Extraction missions," Tae-ho replied. "We establish safe routes through areas where Empire surveillance is weakest. Use our stealth technology, combined with the outcasts' natural invisibility to psychic detection. We could build an underground railroad for people the Empire doesn't even realize are escaping." Over the following months, Tae-ho worked with Narazel and her network to identify potential recruits across dozens of Zephyrian worlds. The process was delicate and dangerous. They had to make contact with individuals who had spent their entire lives hiding their condition, convince them that escape was possible, and then coordinate complex extraction operations without alerting Empire authorities. The first rescue mission targeted an industrial world called Nexus Prime, where intelligence suggested several outcasts were working in the vast manufacturing complexes. Tae-ho piloted a modified cargo ship that looked exactly like thousands of other vessels that visited the planet daily for legitimate trade. Hidden in specially shielded compartments were Narazel and 2 other rescued outcasts who could move through Zephyrian society without being detected. Their job was to make contact with the targets and guide them to predetermined pickup points. "Remember," Narazel briefed her team before they landed, "these people have been living in fear their entire lives. They've been told they're worthless, broken, defective. It's going to take time to convince them that they have value and that escape is really possible." The mission was more successful than anyone had hoped. They made contact with 7 outcasts working in different parts of the manufacturing complex, including an older Zephyrian named Vor-shan, who had been hiding his condition for over 40 years, and a young engineer named Selmira, who had been using her analytical skills to design more efficient production systems. "I never dreamed there were others like me," Selmira whispered, as Tae-ho's ship lifted off from Nexus Prime with their rescued passengers. "I thought I was the only one in the galaxy who couldn't use the gift that makes us Zephyrian." "You're not broken," Narazel told her gently. "You're immune, and that immunity is going to help us win this war." As their rescue operations continued, a pattern emerged that amazed everyone involved. The outcasts they rescued weren't just surviving. In Zephyrian society, many of them were thriving in ways their psychically dependent relatives couldn't understand. They had developed incredible problem-solving skills, attention to detail, and technological expertise precisely because they couldn't rely on psychic shortcuts. Vorshan turned out to be a brilliant strategist who had been analyzing Empire military patterns for decades. Selmira's engineering knowledge helped improve both human and captured Zephyrian technology. A former servant named Kolreth had memorized the layouts and security procedures of dozens of government buildings during his years of being ignored and overlooked. They've been building the perfect resistance movement without even realizing it, Dr. Hyojin observed during one of their regular briefings. Decades of outcasts developing skills and knowledge that the Empire never bothered to monitor because they assumed these people were harmless. Captain Tejo established a network of safe houses and hidden bases throughout the outer systems, places where rescued outcasts could train and prepare for operations against their former oppressors. His transport ships moved constantly between Empire and human space, their cargo holds filled with people the Zephyrians didn't even realize were missing. The most remarkable thing about the growing resistance network was how completely invisible it remained to Empire authorities. Psychic surveillance systems designed to monitor thoughts and intentions registered nothing when outcasts moved through their society. Security forces trained to detect mental deception and hidden motives found no traces of the conspiracy growing. Right under their noses, Emperor Veltak's intelligence services continued to report that resistance activities were impossible to track, that attacks seemed to come from nowhere and vanish without trace. They had no idea that their own discarded citizens were systematically dismantling the Empire's infrastructure, while remaining completely undetectable to the very systems designed to maintain control. The outcasts had become what Narazel called the Empire's blind spot, a growing force of liberation that operated in the one realm where Zephyrian superiority couldn't reach. Communications officer Li So-young was monitoring routine transmissions when her equipment suddenly exploded. With activity, every frequency was being flooded with the same message, broadcast across dozens of star systems simultaneously. The power required for such a transmission was enormous, something only the Zephyrian Empire's Central Command could manage. "Commander Jun, you need to see this immediately," So-young called out, her voice tight with concern. She transferred the incoming signal to the main bridge display, where the massive form of Emperor Veltak appeared in a shimmering hologram. The alien ruler looked different than he had during the peace negotiations months earlier. His four eyes blazed with fury, and the crystalline throne behind him pulsed with angry red energy that reflected his emotional state. When he spoke, his psychic voice carried a rage that made even the non-telepathic humans feel uncomfortable. "I address the human commander who harbors my worthless daughter," Veltak's mental voice boomed through the bridge speakers. "Your species has grown bold beyond your station, using deception and trickery to achieve victories against your superiors. But your games end now." Jun felt his stomach tighten as he realized what was coming. Around the bridge, his crew stopped their work to listen to the Emperor's ultimatum. "Return Princess Narazel to me within 7 of your days, or I will demonstrate why my empire has ruled this galaxy for 1,000 years. I will turn your precious colonies into burning monuments to your arrogance. Every human world will burn until my daughter is returned to face judgment for her betrayal." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in tense silence. So-young quickly ran the message through her analysis systems, checking for hidden signals or additional information. "The transmission originated from Zephyr Prime itself," she reported. "Maximum power broadcast, sent to every known human settlement and military base. He's not making a private threat. He's announcing this to the entire galaxy." Jun called an emergency meeting of all senior staff and resistance leaders. Within an hour, the ship's briefing room was packed with humans and Zephyrian outcasts, all discussing the implications of the Emperor's demand. "He's desperate," observed Intelligence Officer Minho, studying the communication logs. "Our sabotage operations have crippled 3 major supply lines, destroyed 2 military staging areas, and rescued hundreds of political prisoners. The Empire is losing control, and he knows it. Dr. Hai-Jin nodded in agreement. The timing of this ultimatum proves we've been more successful than we realized. He wouldn't risk looking weak by making public threats unless he had no other options. All eyes turned to Princess Narazel, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table. She had been studying the holographic display that showed Emperor Veltak's message. Her silver eyes focused on her father's image with an expression that June couldn't quite read. "Princess," June said gently, "whatever you decide, we'll support you. If you want to return to prevent innocent people from being hurt, we'll find a way to make that work. But if you want to fight..." Narazel stood up slowly, her decision already made. "My father called me worthless and gave me away like broken furniture. Now he discovers that his worthless daughter has become the architect of his empire's downfall, and he wants me back." She looked around the room at the faces of humans and outcasts who had become her family. "But I'm not the same person he discarded. I won't go crawling back to beg for his forgiveness." She moved to the star charts displayed on the room's main screen, pointing to the heavily defended system at the heart of the Zephyrian Empire. "Instead, I propose we give him something he's not expecting. A direct assault on Zephyr Prime itself." The room erupted in surprised voices. Captain Teho was the first to speak coherently. "Princess, that's the most heavily defended world in Hay. The galaxy. The capital system has more warships than the rest of the Empire combined, which is exactly why they won't expect us to attack it," Narazel replied calmly. "My father thinks like all Zephyrians. He believes superior numbers and psychic power make him invincible. He's never faced an enemy he couldn't detect or predict." Engineer Sora leaned forward, intrigued despite the apparent impossibility of the plan. "What are you thinking?" Narazel began outlining her strategy, and as she spoke, Jun realized that the frightened princess he had first met had transformed into something extraordinary. She had become a military leader who understood both human creativity and Zephyrian weaknesses better than anyone else in the galaxy. "We have over 200 outcasts now operating throughout the Empire," she explained. "Many of them work in government facilities, military bases, and infrastructure centers on Zephyr Prime itself. They've been invisible to Imperial security for their entire lives. What if they stopped hiding and started acting?" The plan she described was audacious and terrifying, a coordinated uprising of invisible agents striking simultaneously at the Empire's command centers, while human forces engaged the military directly. It would require perfect timing, incredible courage, and more than a little luck. "The risks are enormous," Jun admitted after she finished explaining. "If we fail, it won't just be the end of our resistance movement. The Empire will hunt down every human settlement in the galaxy." Narazel met his gaze steadily. "And if we do nothing, my father will carry out his threat anyway. At least this way we have a chance to end the war instead of just postponing our defeat." Jun looked around the room at his officers and allies. He saw fear in their faces, but also determination. These people had followed him through impossible battles before, trusting his judgment even when victory seemed hopeless. "All right, Princess," he said finally. "If you're determined to go home, let's make sure you arrive with the kind of welcome party your father will never forget." As the meeting broke up and teams began planning the most dangerous operation in human history, Jun realized that Emperor Veltak had made a critical error. By demanding his daughter's return, he had given her the perfect excuse to come home, not as a prisoner but as a conqueror. The approach to Zephyr Prime looked like a standard human military assault from every angle the Empire could observe. Commander Jun's fleet of 30 ships moved in formation toward the heavily defended capital world, their weapons powered and shields raised for battle. To the thousands of Zephyrian defenders monitoring the advance, it appeared to be exactly what Emperor Veltak had predicted, a desperate human attack that would be crushed within hours. What the Empire couldn't see was the real assault force. Hidden. Throughout the approaching fleet, in specially shielded compartments that psychic sensors couldn't penetrate, were 250 Zephyrian outcasts led by Princess Narazel. These invisible warriors had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying facility layouts provided by their agents already on the planet, and memorizing synchronized attack plans that would strike at the heart of the Empire's power structure. Science. Officer Dr. Shin Ye-rin monitored the operation from her position aboard June's flagship, surrounded by banks of computers that displayed real-time data from across Zephyr Prime. Her job was perhaps the most crucial of all, coordinating the technical aspects of dismantling an empire's worth of psychic technology while the battle raged. Overhead, psychic defense grid is at full power, Ye-rin reported as the human fleet entered the outer system. All major communication nodes are active. The Empire's entire command structure is operating normally. June nodded, watching the tactical display as hundreds of Zephyrian warships moved to intercept his forces. Perfect. They have no idea what's about to hit them. The space battle began exactly as the Empire expected. Human ships engaged Zephyrian defenders in a fierce firefight among the outer planets of the system. Explosions lit up the darkness as shields failed and hulls were breached. To any observer, it looked like another desperate human assault that would ultimately fail against superior numbers and psychic coordination. But while the fleets fought above, small transport pods detached from the human ships and began their silent descent toward Zephyr Prime's surface. Each pod was designed to look like space debris or damaged ship components, nothing that would attract attention from defenders focused on the major battle overhead. Narazel rode in the lead pod with 25 of her most experienced agents. As they descended through the planet's atmosphere, she reviewed the mission one final time through her headset. Team Alpha, you have the Central Command Facility. Team Beta takes the Psychic Communication Array. Team Gamma hits the Orbital Defense Control. Remember, we have exactly 30 minutes to complete our objectives before the space battle above attracts reinforcements from other systems. The pods landed at predetermined points across the capital city, their occupants emerging into a world that had never experienced enemy attack. Zephyr Prime's billions of inhabitants went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their most dangerous enemies were walking among them, invisible to every security system the Empire had ever developed. Dr. Ye-rin tracked each team's progress through encrypted communicators that used technology too primitive for Zephyrian sensors to monitor effectively. Team Alpha is inside the Central Command Building, she reported to June. Team Beta has reached the communication array. All teams are proceeding according to schedule. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. While normal invaders would have to fight through layers of psychic barriers and telepathic guards, Narazel's teams simply walked through the front doors. Security systems designed to detect hostile thoughts registered nothing. Guards trained to sense aggressive intentions noticed no threats. Even the most sensitive psychic detection equipment showed only empty corridors where the outcasts moved with deadly purpose. In the Central Command Facility, Team Alpha worked methodically through floors of government offices where the Empire's most important decisions were made. They planted signal jammers that would disrupt psychic communications, downloaded classified intelligence about military deployments, and quietly eliminated key personnel who would coordinate the Empire's response to the attack. Meanwhile, Team Beta had reached the massive psychic communication array that allowed instant telepathic contact across the galaxy. Science Officer Ye-rin guided them through the process of installing viral programs into the system's core computers. These weren't ordinary computer viruses, but specially designed interference patterns that would create psychic static across the entire Imperial communication network. Initiating primary system corruption, Team Beta's leader reported. Psychic amplifiers are beginning to destabilize. Across the planet, similar scenes played out at dozens of critical facilities. Team Gamma disabled the orbital defense control systems, leaving the planet's surface vulnerable to bombardment from space. Team Delta infiltrated the military command center, accessing codes that would allow them to send false orders to Imperial fleets throughout the galaxy. Team Echo penetrated the Emperor's own palace, moving through halls where Narazel had once walked as a despised outcast. The first sign that something was wrong came when communication between Zephyrian ships in the space battle above began to break down. Psychic links that had functioned perfectly for centuries suddenly filled with static and interference. Orders became garbled. Coordination collapsed. "What's happening to our communications?" Emperor Veltak's voice thundered through the palace. As his advisors struggled to understand the systematic failure of their technology, "Why can't I contact our fleet commanders?" His chief technician, a powerful telepath named Mordax, stood before the crystal throne with confusion written across his four-armed form. "Great Emperor, our psychic networks are experiencing interference from an unknown source. It's as if something is physically blocking our telepathic transmissions." Dr. Yerin watched her displays with satisfaction as system after system throughout the Empire went dark. "Psychic communication array is offline," she reported to Jun. "Central Command has lost contact with outer system bases. Orbital defense. Grid is down. The Empire's command structure is collapsing." In space above Zephyr Prime, the effect was immediate and devastating. Zephyrian ships that had been fighting with perfect coordination suddenly found themselves isolated and confused. Human forces, trained to operate independently without psychic links, quickly gained the advantage as their enemies struggled to adapt to fighting without telepathic support. But the most important target still remained. Deep in the Imperial Palace, Narazel herself moved through corridors she remembered from childhood, now approaching the throne room where her father had once mocked her as worthless. The same silver-eyed princess who had been given away like broken furniture was about to confront the Emperor, who had never imagined she would return as the architect of his empire's destruction. "All teams report primary objectives complete," she whispered into her communicator as she reached the massive doors to the throne room. "Beginning final phase." The doors opened, and Princess Narazel stepped into the chamber where her new life had begun, ready to end the old one forever. The massive doors to the Imperial throne room slid open with the same crystal chime that Narazel remembered from her childhood. But as she stepped into the vast chamber, everything else had changed. The purple light that once pulsed with confident power now flickered uncertainly. The hundreds of courtiers who had laughed at her disgrace were gone, evacuated, or fled as reports of the attack spread through the palace. Only Emperor Veltak remained, seated on his crystal throne that now seemed smaller somehow, less magnificent than she remembered. His four eyes tracked her movement as she walked across the polished floor, but for the first time in her life, she felt no fear under his gaze. "So," the Emperor's psychic voice echoed through the empty chamber, "my broken daughter returns home, at last, though not quite as I expected." Narazel stopped before the throne, close enough to see the confusion and growing fear in her father's expression. "I told you I would return, Father. You just didn't expect me to bring an army you couldn't." "See?" Veltak's eyes narrowed as he tried to read her thoughts, to peer into her mind as he had done to countless others throughout his reign. But her consciousness remained completely closed to him, a blank void where he expected to find the usual streams of thought and emotion that flowed from every other Zephyrian. "Impossible," he whispered, his mental voice losing some of its commanding power. "You are defective, broken. You cannot resist my will." "That's where you're wrong," Narazel replied calmly. "I'm not broken at all. I'm immune, and that immunity is what brought your empire down." As if to emphasize her words, explosions echoed from somewhere deep in the palace as her teams completed their final objectives. The crystal walls trembled, and several of the ornamental light fixtures crashed to the floor in showers of sparkling fragments. Emperor Veltak rose from his throne, his four arms extending as psychic energy began to build around him like visible heat waves. "You may be immune to my mind touch, but you are still flesh and blood. I can crush you without reading your thoughts." "You could try," Narazel agreed, "but it wouldn't matter anymore. Your fleet is scattered and confused without psychic coordination. Your command centers are offline. Your communication networks are down. Even if you killed me right here, right now, the damage is already done." She gestured toward the throne room's massive windows, where the glow of explosions in orbit painted the sky in shifting orange light. "Your ships are fighting individual battles instead of coordinated attacks. Your ground forces can't receive orders. Your governors throughout the galaxy don't even know what's happening here. The empire you built on psychic dominance is crumbling because you never prepared for an enemy you couldn't control." The truth of her words hit the Emperor like a physical blow. For 1,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had expanded across the galaxy by overwhelming other species with superior psychic abilities. They had never encountered resistance they couldn't simply crush with mental force or subvert through telepathic manipulation. "How?" Veltak demanded, his voice carrying a note of genuine bewilderment. "How did a worthless, defective creature like you accomplish what entire civilizations could not?" Narazel smiled, and for the first time, it held no trace of the sadness or shame that had once defined her. "Because I learned to see value where you saw only weakness. You taught me that I was broken, because I couldn't read minds or move objects with thought. But the humans taught me something different." She moved closer to the throne, and despite his psychic powers, Emperor Veltak found himself taking a step backward. "They taught me that diversity creates strength, not weakness. That different perspectives and abilities working together accomplish more than any single advantage. You gave me away because I couldn't use psychic powers, but that immunity made me invisible to everything you built to maintain control." The palace shook again as another explosion rocked the structure. Through the crystal walls, the sounds of ground fighting could be heard as Zephyrian security forces tried desperately to locate attackers they couldn't sense or predict. More importantly, Narazel continued, "I learned that real leadership isn't about dominating others through superior power. It's about inspiring them to work together toward a common goal. The humans didn't follow me because I could control their minds. They followed me because I offered them something worth fighting for." Emperor Veltak's psychic aura flickered and dimmed as the reality of his situation became clear. "What do you want from me? Surrender? Abdication?" "I want nothing from you," Narazel replied. "Your empire is already finished. Within days, word of what happened here will spread throughout the galaxy. Every species you've oppressed, every world you've conquered through psychic manipulation, will realize that the mighty Zephyrian Empire can be defeated by enemies it cannot detect or control." She turned toward the throne room doors, then paused to look back at the alien who had once held absolute power over her life. "I came here to prove a point, Father. Not to you, but to everyone watching. The daughter you called worthless and gave away like broken furniture has become the architect of your downfall. Every outcast you discarded, every individual you labeled as defective, represents a blind spot in your perfect psychic society." As she walked away, Emperor Veltak's voice followed her, no longer carrying the commanding presence of absolute authority, but the desperate plea of a defeated ruler. "Where will you go? What will you do now?" Narazel paused at the threshold of the throne room, looking back one final time at the crystal chamber where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. "I'm going home," she said simply. "To the people who saw strength where you saw weakness, who valued what I could offer, instead of mourning what I lacked. I'm going back to my real family." She left Emperor Veltak alone in his crumbling palace, a ruler whose empire had fallen not to superior force, but to the very people he had deemed unworthy of existence. Outside, Commander June's forces were already establishing control over the capital, while her network of invisible agents coordinated the peaceful surrender of government facilities across the planet. The war was over, ended not by conquest but by revelation. The galaxy would never again underestimate the power that could be found in those whom others considered broken. Princess Narazel had returned home at last, but home was no longer a crystal palace on Zephyr Prime. Home was wherever people valued her for what she was, rather than dismissing her for what she wasn't.